Captain Lara Weaver stood before the panoramic windows of the Galactic Council's meeting hall, staring out at the sprawling nebula beyond. It shimmered with an eerie purple glow, a reminder of how insignificant any one of them, human or alien, was in the grand scale of the universe. She had to remind herself of that now, as the murmurs from the council floor swelled behind her like a distant storm. A soft ping sounded from her wrist comm. She glanced at the display, and a tight knot twisted in her stomach. It was a private message, urgent. She slid her hand over the screen, activating the encrypted message. The vote is coming. Starzin is pushing for it. Be ready. Lara felt her pulse quicken. The vote. She had known this day was coming. Everyone had. But knowing didn't make it any easier to stomach. The Galactic Council had been a battlefield of politicking for decades, but the humans had always stayed on the periphery, respected only for their ability to fight, not for their voice. Now they were about to lose what little leverage they had. Turning, Lara moved swiftly to her seat on the human delegation's side. She caught the gaze of Ambassador Elara Thompson, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 40s, who gave a subtle nod, her expression grim. Lara's instincts flared. Something was wrong. Elara leaned in as Lara settled beside her. You've heard the rumors? More than rumors, Lara muttered. We've been blindsided. The others around them had already begun settling into their chairs, preparing for the session. As the last few council representatives filtered in, the air in the chamber grew thick with expectation. Lara scanned the room, noting the familiar faces of the other delegates, each with their own agenda, each silently jockeying for advantage. And then there was Starzin. The insectoid figure sat at the center, towering over the assembly. His 6 limbs, spiny and black, folded neatly in front of him, his exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh lights. His multifaceted eyes gleamed with calculated intent. He was the embodiment of authority, calm, distant, and impenetrable. But Lara could feel the undercurrent of tension, the weight of a decision that hung over them all. Council members, Starzin's voice reverberated, smooth and cold. The matters of the day have been presented. Let us begin our deliberations. Lara had been in the council chambers long enough to know this was just the prelude to what they all feared. The formalities were a mask, and the real business was always hidden beneath the surface. This time, however, the threat wasn't subtle. Lara's gut twisted as she realized they were no longer debating the issue, they were about to decide it. Elara leaned toward Lara again. It's happening today, Captain. Starzin won't wait. Lara swallowed hard, keeping her gaze forward. We're outvoted. Not yet. Lara's thoughts raced. The rumors had been growing for months. A new bill was being fast-tracked through the council, a bill that would fundamentally alter the structure of the interstellar treaties that had kept the peace for centuries. But what had been whispered only in dark corridors was now coming to a head. The bill would force humanity's colonies under the direct control of other species. Their sovereignty, their freedom would be stripped away. And Starzin was leading the charge. The vote wasn't just about policy. It was about the future of humanity in the galaxy. If the Council passed this measure, humanity would be forced to fall in line with the established order, a mere footnote in a galaxy of ancient civilizations. Lara's jaw tightened. It was exactly what the Council had been planning for decades, to tame the humans, to keep them in their place. But Lara wasn't about to let that happen. Now we move to the first measure, Starzin said, cutting through her thoughts. The proposal to revise the autonomy of non-core colonies. Humanity's territories are being considered as part of this reform. A ripple ran through the chamber. The word reform hung in the air like a veiled threat. Lara's fingers flexed against the cold surface of the table in front of her. The speech was no accident. Starzin was playing his part, framing the proposal as a natural step for the betterment of the galaxy. But the truth was far darker. Ambassador Weaver, Starzin called out, his gaze falling upon her with that same implacable coldness. Perhaps you'd like to speak on behalf of your people? Lara stood, her posture rigid, her heart pounding in her chest. All eyes were on her, the young human representative among centuries-old species. She could feel the weight of their gazes, skeptical, condescending. The hum of alien voices seemed to echo in her ears. "We are here as equals," Lara began, her voice cutting through the tension, steady and firm. "Humanity is no longer a fledgling species. We've fought wars, faced extinction, and emerged stronger each time. To suggest that our colonies, our people, be subjugated under the rule of others is an insult to every human who has ever stood on the front lines of our galaxy." There was a murmur in the room, some intrigued, others irritated. Starzin raised a single, spindly limb, silencing the chatter. "And yet, Ambassador, as a species newly emerged into galactic politics, you must understand the necessity of unity. The Council's laws exist to protect the stability of the galaxy as a whole. Without them, chaos would reign." Lara's eyes narrowed. Unity. That was the word Starzin always used. But it wasn't unity he sought, it was control. "You call it unity," Lara countered, "but it's nothing more than a way for the established powers to maintain their dominance. You'd force humanity to live under your laws while you remain untouched. This reform isn't about protection, it's about control." Starzin's mandibles twitched, and the room fell into a heavy silence. The speaker's response was slow, measured. "Your words are bold, Captain Weaver. But they are also irrelevant." The cold dismissal was like a slap to the face, but Lara stood firm. The council members had always underestimated humanity's resolve. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The vote was scheduled. It would happen soon. And with it, Lara realized, so too would the fate of humanity. As the council began its deliberation, Lara's thoughts were already turning to what came next. There was no longer any room for negotiation. The humans would have to make a choice: stand their ground or retreat into the shadows of galactic politics forever. But Lara Weaver had never been one to bow. Not to anyone. The storm was coming. And this time, humanity would be the one to make the first move. Lara stood in the dimly lit corridors beneath the Galactic Council chamber, her boots echoing against the metallic floor. The hum of the station, constant and mechanical, only heightened the growing unease in her chest. The vote was tomorrow, and with it, humanity's future. But there was something more, something deeper at play, and she needed answers. The dark passage ahead of her curved sharply, leading to the Council's most sensitive wing. Few were allowed beyond this point. It was here that the more clandestine matters of galactic politics were handled, off-record negotiations, shadowy deals, and those who thought themselves too powerful to be questioned. Lara's connection to this wing was limited, but a few strategic alliances had opened doors for her. She stopped in front of an unmarked door, pausing to read the encrypted signal patch on her wrist. A brief flash of code blinked back at her, a confirmation of a rendezvous. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small, stark room lit by an array of monitors and terminal screens. Seated at the table was Ambassador Elara Thompson, her face as serious as ever, and a figure cloaked in shadow, a name Lara only knew by reputation. "I trust you found your way here, Captain?" Elara's voice was low, cautious. She didn't even look up, her eyes fixed on the terminal in front of her. Lara stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. "I'm starting to think I'll need a few more favors from you if I'm going to get any answers." Elara's fingers paused on the console, her gaze flickering to the side before she turned to face Lara. "We don't have much time. You're right to be suspicious. The measure Starzin is pushing, it's not just about autonomy. There's something else. A deeper layer. But getting to it is dangerous." Lara raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous? How?" "You're not the only one who's been listening to whispers." Elara hesitated. "There are factions within the Council, powerful factions, who believe humanity is a threat. They've seen your rise, your technology, your expansion. You're too quick, too unpredictable for their tastes." Lara clenched her jaw. So, we're being punished for not asking permission to exist? That's one way to look at it. But the truth is far more complicated. Ilara's voice dropped even lower. Starzin isn't the only one driving this. He's the front runner, yes, but there are others who are influencing him. A coalition of older species who have maintained control of the Council for centuries. They've seen your potential, and they're terrified. Lara's eyes narrowed. Who? Ilara leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. The Shilna, the Vork, and most of the Consortium. They've been quietly undermining humanity's influence for years, using Starzin to push their agenda. Lara's mind raced. The Shilna were a nomadic, reptilian race, known for their brutal militaristic tactic. The Vork, a race of telepathic mollusks, were infamous for their ability to sway minds with their powers. The Consortium, a loose collective of wealthy and influential trade species, were more concerned with maintaining control over resources than actual governance. They all had a stake in keeping humanity at bay. And if we just sit back and let it happen? Lara asked, her voice cold. Ilara's expression hardened. You won't just be sidelined. If this passes, humanity's colonies will be forcibly integrated into other species' territories. Your people will lose their identity, their sovereignty. And the rest of the galaxy will treat you like any other conquered species. Lara's thoughts flashed to Earth, to the colonies scattered across the galaxy, each with their own unique challenges, their own evolving cultures. The thought of them being swallowed whole by the larger powers was enough to ignite a rage she hadn't allowed herself to feel yet. But this wasn't just about rage. It was about survival. Is there anything we can do? She asked, already knowing the answer. We can expose them, Ilara replied. But not without consequences. Lara's pulse quickened. What kind of consequences? War. A full-scale conflict. The factions we're dealing with are too powerful to be taken down quietly. If you expose the conspiracy, they'll retaliate. And not just with words. Starzin controls a fleet of warships, and he has allies within the military. Lara's hand tightened into a fist. So, our choices are either to stand down or fight a war we're not prepared for? For now, yes. But there is another option, Ilara said, her voice lowering again. Leave the Council. Lara stared at her. What? Withdraw. Humanity leaves the Council completely. It's drastic, but it may be our only way out without spilling blood. Lara's mind raced. The idea of abandoning the Council was unimaginable. The Council was humanity's lifeline to the galaxy. It was where deals were made, where alliances were forged. Without the Council, humanity would be isolated, vulnerable. It was a risky gamble, one that might push the galaxy toward war, but if they remained, humanity would be nothing more than a footnote, erased and absorbed. Are you suggesting we just walk away? Lara asked, disbelief and fury rising in her chest. After everything we've fought for? Ilara stood, pacing as she spoke. Sometimes, doing nothing is worse than choosing the fight. If we stay in the Council now, we risk everything. If we leave, we send a message. Humanity will not be controlled. It's a bold move, Lara. But it's a message the galaxy will hear. Lara remained silent for a moment, letting the weight of Ilara's words sink in. There was no easy solution. No right answer. Whatever path they chose, the galaxy would remember it. What's the next step? Lara finally asked, her voice resolute. We need to gather allies, Ilara said. There are others who are disillusioned with the current structure. Some will support us if we make the right moves. But we need leverage. We need proof of the conspiracy before we act. Lara nodded, her mind already shifting into planning mode. I'll get it. And then we'll make our move. The Council won't know what hit them. As she turned to leave, Ilara called after her. Be careful, Lara. This isn't just about a vote anymore. They'll do anything to keep their grip on power. Lara paused in the doorway, her hand on the handle. She looked back at Ilara, her expression fierce. I didn't come this far to back down now. We're not just fighting for our future, Elara. We're fighting for the soul of humanity. With that, she stepped into the corridor, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft hiss. The clock was ticking. There was no turning back now. The fight for humanity's place in the galaxy had begun. The briefing room was cold, colder than usual, and the dim lights overhead seemed to amplify the tension that hung in the air. Lara stood at the front of the room, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Around her, the other members of the human delegation were scattered, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts. They had all been summoned here for the same reason, to make a decision that would shape the future of humanity in the galaxy. Elara sat at the far end of the table, her face drawn with exhaustion. The sleepless nights were beginning to show. She'd been at the heart of the negotiations for years, but now her resolve was starting to wear thin. They all knew what was coming. "We don't have much time," Lara said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The vote is tomorrow. Once Starzin pushes that measure through, we're out of options. This isn't about policy anymore. It's about survival." Survival? Ambassador Kalos, a grizzled veteran of galactic diplomacy, scoffed from the far side of the room. His broad, alien face twisted in disdain. "We're being pushed into a corner, Captain. I'm not sure we even have a chance at survival in this scenario." "We always have a chance," Lara snapped back. "But only if we fight for it. If we pull out of the Council now, if we go public with the truth, we're making a statement. Not just to them, but to the entire galaxy. Humanity isn't a footnote. We won't be erased." Elara raised a hand, cutting off any further debate. "We've been over this, Lara. Pulling out is a risk. A huge risk. It could spark an all-out war." Lara's eyes narrowed. She'd known that from the beginning. "And if we stay in, we'll be subjugated. We'll be treated like a conquered species, forced to bow to whatever policies they decide. We've already lost if we let that happen." "We're not ready for war," Kalos muttered, rubbing his temples. "We've been building up our military, yes, but against whom? The Shilna? The Vork? We don't even know the full extent of their military capabilities. What do we do then, Captain? Do we just throw our people into the fire?" Lara took a deep breath, her gaze steady as she looked at each of them. She knew they were all right in their own ways. The decision wasn't simple. The consequences of pulling out of the Council were unpredictable, but the consequences of staying were even worse. Still, there was no hesitation in her voice when she spoke next. "We prepare. We don't sit on our hands and wait for them to destroy us. We gather intel, build alliances, and we hit back. Not just to survive, but to show them that they've made a mistake." There was a heavy silence in the room. No one spoke. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the station, the distant clang of metal echoing through the walls. Ambassador Maris, the youngest member of the delegation, spoke up quietly. "What if there's a third option? A way to turn this around from within the Council? If we expose the conspiracy?" Lara shook her head. "It's too late for that. We've already been through the motions. We've seen how Starzin and his allies have been pulling the strings behind the scenes. The truth won't stop the vote from going through. If anything, it'll just give them more ammunition to discredit us." "But we don't even know the full extent of the conspiracy," Maris pressed. "What if we have more to use against them? What if—" "Enough," Elara interrupted. "We've all considered that route. The problem is, we don't have enough evidence to stop them, and every attempt we've made to uncover more has been blocked. Starzin controls too much, and the consortium is backing him. There's no way we can force a change from the inside. Not anymore." Lara nodded grimly. The time for subtlety was over. They couldn't play by the Council's rules any longer. Their best shot was to make a decisive move, one that would make the entire galaxy take notice. But first, they had to find a way to break through the system that had kept humanity in check for so long. "We need leverage," Lara said, her voice firm. "A way to shake things up." "You're talking about a power move," Kalos said, looking up at her sharply. Something big. Something to force their hand. Lara's eyes flashed with determination. Exactly. We need to remind them who we are. But first, we need to secure the support of those who are willing to stand with us. Elara, have you made contact with the other delegates? Elara nodded, her face tense. I've been in touch with a few. Some of the smaller systems are open to the idea. But others, especially the Shilna and Vork, they'll never side with us. They're already too deep in Starzin's pocket. And the consortium? Lara asked, her gaze narrowing. They're neutral for now, Elara replied. They don't want to risk a war, but they also don't want to be left out in the new order. They're waiting to see which way the wind blows. Lara's mind churned. The consortium would be critical. If they could sway even a few of their members, it might tilt the balance enough to push the council into a stalemate. But getting them on their side wouldn't be easy. They had to act quickly before the vote passed. Then we move fast, Lara said, a cold resolve settling over her. We make our case to the consortium, gather whatever allies we can, and prepare to make our move. The rest of the delegation nodded, the weight of the decision sinking in. There was no going back now. The lines had been drawn. They were either going to fight for humanity's future or watch it be erased in the name of galactic unity. But Lara wasn't about to let that happen. The room fell silent once more, but this time, it was a silence filled with purpose. They all knew what had to be done. The pieces were in place, and the only thing left to do was play the game. A game that would determine the fate of their species. Lara straightened her posture, the fire of determination burning brighter than ever. We do this together. For humanity. As the room came alive with movement, with plans being set in motion and alliances forming in whispered tones, Lara took a final glance at the faces around her. They were with her. Every last one of them. And in that moment she knew they were ready. Tomorrow the vote would happen. But before that, humanity would take one final stand. And no matter what happened, they would not go down without a fight. Lara stood at the center of the command room, watching the massive display screens flicker with streams of encrypted data. The final preparations were underway. The humans who had rallied behind her were ready. The pieces on the galactic chessboard had been set in motion, and it was all coming down to this. Tomorrow the council would vote. But humanity would not sit idly by. The tension in the room was palpable, every face set with grim resolve. Some were seasoned diplomats. Others were military veterans, but all of them knew the stakes. The galaxy's future wasn't just at risk, it was about to be rewritten. All channels are secured, Lieutenant Jenna reported, her voice steady as she navigated through the network. We've locked down communications with our key allies. The consortium will be briefed on our move in 15 minutes. The others, they're still on the fence, but we have leverage now. Lara didn't respond right away. She kept her eyes on the large central monitor, where a live feed from the council chamber was displayed. The room beyond was filled with representatives from dozens of species, their voices an indecipherable hum. And in the midst of them, Starzin sat on his elevated seat, exuding the calm, cold authority of a leader who had already won. His icy gaze locked on the screen. Lara clenched her fist. She couldn't afford to let him win, not like this. "How's our leverage looking?" she asked, turning to Elara, who was standing beside her. The older woman's face was a mask of both exhaustion and determination. "We've secured a meeting with the consortium's lead representative. They've agreed to hear our offer. And they'll make their decision after the vote," Lara finished, already knowing the drill. "They'll be watching the vote, yes," Elara confirmed. "And if it passes, they'll stay neutral. They won't risk angering Starzin. And if it doesn't? Then we have a chance." Lara's gaze flickered to the far side of the room, where Ambassador Maris stood, reviewing the final report. The young diplomat looked up and met her eyes, his expression somber. "I've received confirmation from the Shilnau," Maris said, his voice low. "They'll back Starzin. There's no changing their position." Lara's lips pressed into a thin line. The Shilna were known for their loyalty to power, especially if that power came with the promise of violence, and they had been one of the first to side with Starzin's measures, seeing it as an opportunity to expand their territory. "What about the Vork?" Lara asked. Maris shook his head. "They're still undecided. They'll make their decision once the vote is final. But they'll likely go with the majority." "Great," Lara muttered. "So, we need the consortium. If we don't get them, we'll be walking into an ambush." Ilara's voice was sharp. "It's more than that, Lara. If we fail tomorrow, humanity won't just lose its seat on the council. We'll be targeted, isolated. Every system that we've fought to protect will be at risk. We'll have no choice but to fight back, and the odds will be against us." Lara met Ilara's gaze, feeling the weight of the words. The military wasn't ready for this, not by a long shot. The colonies were spread too thin, too unprepared for the kind of galactic war they would face if the vote went south. "Then we make sure it doesn't come to that," Lara said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned back to the monitor, her mind already working ahead. "We secure the consortium's vote. We make sure they know that backing Starzin will cost them." "How?" Maris asked. "We make them see the bigger picture," Lara said, her gaze piercing. "We convince them that siding with the galactic elites won't just hurt humanity, it will destabilize everything. The Council is fractured right now. If we pull out, they'll have to deal with us as equals. And we're not going to just fade into the background. If we leave, the power dynamic shifts." "And what if they don't buy it?" Ilara asked. Lara turned and gave a small, grim smile. "Then we force their hand." The next day came too quickly. Lara stood on the balcony of the Council's observation chamber, staring down at the sea of representatives below. She couldn't afford to look nervous. Not now, not when the weight of the galaxy rested on her shoulders. Ilara approached her, her expression tense. "The consortium is ready. They'll take the meeting after the vote." "Good," Lara replied, her gaze never leaving the assembly. "Once we're through, we make our move." The doors behind them opened, and Ambassador Kaulos stepped inside, his face tight with worry. "The vote is about to start. They're moving into position." Lara nodded, stepping away from the window. The time for talking was over. Now it was time to act. The sound of the Council's proceedings reached their ears. The vote was commencing. In the vast council chamber, the atmosphere was electric. Representatives from dozens of species filled the room, their voices rising and falling in heated debate. Starzin presided over them all, his gaze calculating as he looked from one speaker to the next. "This vote will determine the future of the galaxy," Starzin's voice rang out, calm and commanding. "We must ensure that unity prevails, that the old systems of power are reaffirmed. It is time for a new era, one that no longer accommodates the growing threat of human expansion." The room murmured in agreement, though a few voices of dissent could be heard. Lara, watching from the observation chamber, felt her pulse quicken. It was now or never. Ilara stepped forward, speaking into a comm link. "It's time." Lara turned to the screen. As the vote count began, she knew what she had to do. The consortium's delegates had to see this for what it truly was. She couldn't let them fall into line with the rest of the council's puppets. The vote was close, closer than she'd anticipated. And then, just as the final tally was about to be revealed, a broadcast cut through the proceedings. A signal from an unknown source, encrypted but unmistakable. The consortium's delegates looked up in surprise. Lara's heart pounded. This was it. She had done her part. The screen flashed the message. Humanity will not be erased. The message was simple, but its impact was immediate. The room erupted in confusion, delegates shouting at each other. The consortium delegates stood, torn between the old order and the emerging power of humanity. And then, as if on cue, Lara's voice echoed through the room, amplified by the broadcast. "Today, the galaxy chooses control or freedom. The future is ours, and we will no longer bow to your will." The decision was in their hands now. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath as the silence in the council chamber stretched on. A single message had been broadcasted to every corner of the room, its impact reverberating across every species present. Humanity will not be erased. It was a declaration of defiance, a challenge to the very fabric of the galactic order that had existed for millennia. And for the first time in centuries, humanity had forced the galaxy to listen. Lara's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained impassive. She had done her part. Now it was up to the consortium. What do we do now? Elara's voice was tight with anxiety. She stood beside Lara, watching the chaos unfold before them. Lara didn't look at her. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, where Starzin was furiously gesturing to his allies, his words inaudible but his anger unmistakable. His supporters were scrambling to maintain control of the vote, but the damage had been done. The consortium delegates were already shifting in their seats, whispering among themselves. "We wait," Lara said quietly. "The consortium will make their move. It's up to them now." Maris, who had been standing nearby, stepped closer, his voice urgent. "But what if they don't move fast enough? Starzin is going to use this chaos to push through the vote. The longer we wait, the more damage he'll do." "We wait," Lara repeated, her voice firm. "If we act too soon, it'll look like desperation. The consortium will pull back." The tension in the room grew thicker as the seconds passed. The sound of the vote tally being read out began to echo, but it was barely audible over the buzz of frantic conversations. Starzin's face was twisted in fury now. He had been caught off guard, and the realization that humanity had made a play like this, without warning, without hesitation, was something the Council had never expected. Lara knew the consequences would be severe, but the first step toward humanity's future had already been taken. Minutes dragged on. Then a shift. The consortium delegates stood up, their collective movement swift and synchronized. The leader of the consortium, Taliadar, a tall, stoic figure from the distant Auroch system, approached the central podium. Her voice, as cold and controlled as ever, rang out across the chamber. "We will not be swayed by threats," she began, her eyes sweeping the room. "The consortium stands with those who bring stability to this galaxy. And in this moment, we choose the future of the galaxy, together." Lara's stomach clenched. Was this it? The consortium had to be the deciding factor, but if Taliadar was merely stalling. Then, in a move that sent ripples of surprise through the room, Taliadar's voice grew stronger. "However," she continued, "we will not stand by while any species, no matter how small, is silenced under the guise of unity. We choose to side with the future. And the future is one where humanity is given a voice." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of disbelief, shock, and murmurs of disbelief. Lara's pulse surged, and for the first time in what felt like hours, she allowed herself to breathe. "We will not allow the vote to pass," Taliadar declared, her gaze locking with Starzin's. "We stand with humanity." Lara barely heard Alara's voice next to her, her words barely audible. It worked. "They're with us." Lara turned to face her, her heart still racing. "No. It's only just begun." The next hours were a blur of activity, messages flying back and forth across every channel as the council dissolved into chaos. Starzin's supporters scrambled to counteract the consortium's sudden shift. The smaller species, who had long been kept on the periphery, began to rally behind the message of humanity's defiance. It wasn't just a vote anymore, it was a statement. A war of wills was being fought in real time, and for the first time, humanity had taken the upper hand. But that didn't mean victory was guaranteed. Lara's eyes darted to the view screen in the command room, where the vote tally was being updated in real time. The tally was too close. Too many were still undecided, still trying to read the shifting tide. But the shift in the consortium's position had done more than just alter the course of the vote. It had given the rest of the galaxy permission to question Starzin's power, to consider the possibility that things didn't have to be the way they always had been. Minutes later, the final votes were counted, and the result was announced. The vote fails. Lara's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, the weight of those words seemed to hang in the air. She exchanged a glance with Alara, who was standing at her side, her expression unreadable. "We did it," Alara murmured, her voice thick with disbelief. "Not yet," Lara replied. "We have to secure our future. This is just the beginning." The following weeks were a blur of negotiations, alliances, and public statements. The message had been sent. Humanity was no longer a bystander in the galactic order. With the council vote officially overturned, the negotiations began in earnest. The consortium, alongside the smaller systems that had supported humanity's cause, had positioned themselves as the new center of power. But not everyone was pleased. Starzin's forces moved quickly, launching a series of covert operations to destabilize the fragile alliances humanity had built. He wasn't willing to accept defeat. Not yet. Lara knew what was coming. The battle was far from over. The consortium might have pulled back from the brink, but humanity would have to defend its place in the galaxy, not just through diplomacy, but through strength. "Prepare for the worst," Lara said as she looked over the newly formed coalition. Her voice was calm, but there was a fierceness behind it. "They won't just give up. But now we have the galaxy's attention. We fight for our place, and we fight for our future." The war was no longer just a possibility, it was inevitable. But as Lara looked out across the assembly hall, she knew one thing. Humanity would never again bow to another species. The galaxy had just learned that the true power of the human spirit was not something that could be easily crushed. It was the dawn of a new era, and humanity had made its mark.